The Senate's top Democrat says the mosque in Lower Manhattan should be built somewhere else. Senator Harry Reid is in a tough re-election race in Nevada. He is the highest profile Democrat to break with President Obama, who seemed to back the idea of a mosque at Ground Zero. Take a look at where the proposed mosque will be built at 45 Park Place in Lower Manhattan. Ground Zero sits around the corner and 2 blocks down. Here's a look from the air now. That's Ground Zero in the top center of your screen. And the camera will now zero in on the proposed mosque site. President Obama weighed in on the issue over the weekend, and now it's taking root in what could be a difficult election year for Democrats. Fox 5's Tom Fitzgerald brings us the latest.
As a guest at the White House Friday night, Sarah Najjar Wilson didn't know what she'd hear.
I had no idea what the president was going to speak about.
But what the head of the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee heard was President Obama weighing in on religious rights that others say are just wrong.
That includes the right to build a place of worship in a community center on private property in Lower Manhattan.
The next day, the president seemed to backtrack.
I was not commenting, and I will not comment on the wisdom of making a decision to put a mosque there.
Now, what started as a local fight in NYC has spread across the USA.
How can we do that?
It's completely un-American.
The mosque's supporters charge intolerance.
Nothing short of bigotry, because if it were something other than Muslim, I don't believe you would find this opposition.
While opponents claim insensitivity.
Muslim leadership should move the mosque away from Ground Zero.
But this controversy also serves to highlight the political change in rhetoric regarding Islam in the United States. It was less than a week after the 9/11 attacks that then President George W. Bush came here to this mosque in Washington to stress religious tolerance. President Bush followed up a visit to the Islamic Cultural Center on September 17, 2001, with a speech to the State Department a few days later.
The teachings of Islam make it clear that peace is important.
But with the 2010 November elections closing in, Republicans are closing ranks against President Obama and the Ground Zero Mosque.
The president himself seems to be disconnected from the mainstream of America.
Still, the president's supporters say the political damage is worth it.
What he said there was very courageous, was very brave, and right on point for all the freedoms that we enjoy in this country.
Tom Fitzgerald, Fox 5 News.
All right, for more now on the mosque controversy, we are joined now by J.P. Freire, the associate commentary editor at the Washington Examiner, and Solon Simmons, who studies populism and political movements and how presidents convey their messages. He's with the Institute for Conflict Analysis at George Mason University. Thanks to both of you for being here this morning.
Thanks for having us.
Let's start first, Solon. Let me ask you, first of all, should the president have even brought this up at all? Should he have addressed this in any way with the upcoming elections in November?
Well, this president is in a difficult position with any issues that have to do with what we might call the culture wars. I mean, he has, based on who he is, we think of him in a different way. I think that it's a difficult issue for him to have said something about, but at the same time, you think about this in an international setting. We're worried about the local political scene. He's also worried about the fact that we're in 2 wars overseas, and he's worried about how this is going to play. And I think that the problem with how this issue might play out is it puts us into an us versus them kind of situation, and that's not going to be good for America in the world. And so he's thinking about this in a broader sense. It goes back to the civil rights movement, which had a very similar kind of situation, where the civil rights movement moved forward in part because of domestic efforts, but also because of the way the Soviets were portraying our internal conflicts. So if this breaks out into the kind of cultural war issue it may well do, that is going to be bad in some sense for Democrats, but it's also going to be bad for Americans. And so that's something I think he's worried about, and he's trying to straddle that. And I think he's straddled that in a way which probably plays to the American people, which says people don't necessarily want the mosque where it is. At the same time, we like religious freedom.
So you're saying he's looking at more than just the ramifications on the Democratic Party when it comes to the elections in November. Yeah. JP, what do you think about this?
Well, I think I'm surprised that there's so much surprise about the surprise. The fact that there is as much outrage about where the Cordoba house is going to be located, I forget what is going to be called now, but the outrage over that is fairly justified insofar as it was a surprise to a bunch of people that hadn't heard about this issue before. They were clearly going to be fairly upset about it. And then you have people who are saying, well, you're bigoted if you're against it. Well, they're not really bigoted because they weren't protesting mosques over the last 10 years. I mean, plenty of mosques have been constructed over the last few years. There are plenty of mosques in New York City. The discussion is about the proximity to Ground Zero and the sensitivity connectivity issue. And it's relevant because the entire idea behind this particular community center is that it's going to be a bridge, that it was supposed to help bridge the gap between Muslim culture and Western culture, and that it was going to be sort of an outreach center. And doing it this way was so ham-fisted that people are saying, this is upsetting us. And so I think a smart thing to do would probably be to locate it somewhere else.
Now that it's here, now that it's out there, what do conservatives do with this now as we lead up to the November elections? Are they really going to take this and run with this? Is this going to be a major player, or is this something that is going to get, something else will come up in the meantime, this will get bypassed, pushed to the back burner before November?
Well, it's interesting how it's played out for Harry Reid, right? You know, Reid is in a difficult re-election campaign. He's being challenged by Sharon Angle, who has basically forced him into a position where he has to take a position aside from the president. And the president has basically made it very difficult for Democrats to not speak out on this. They wanted to keep mum, but now they're going to have to take a position. So it's not so much what conservatives or Republicans are going to be doing. It's more like, how do Democrats put distance from the president, or how they wind up aligning themselves with him.
Solon, is this going to split Democrats?
It probably will, although I don't think it has to. I mean, this election is about 10% unemployment. Ultimately, these kinds of culture war issues produce, if there were a bulb, they produce more heat than they do light. People divide in them, they get excited about them. We like to talk about them in the media, but if you look at the best evidence, it appears that Americans are quite sensible. They're conflicted about these issues, they're ambivalent about these issues, they fall out in the ways when we poll, and Fox News has done a good job of polling this, they think about it on the one hand, and on the other hand, and the only thing that it might well do that would push Democrats to actually want to get involved in something like this is by a turnout effect. I mean, it's not clear that you're going to divide. People who are divided on this are already divided on this. The economy is what matters. The Democrats had the reins. They didn't necessarily, they may have averted a Great Depression, but we are where we are today. And so I think that this kind of, I mean, if I were a Republican, it might make sense to push this kind of issue. It's not clear that it's going to be the best one in turning out to turn over to the House, I would think.
Let me ask you, when we look at the big picture here, what we found, we put this out as one of our web polls, and we found, according to our viewers and our respondents and the people that visited our website, more than 80% said they were against putting this mosque this close to ground zero. But yet when we went out yesterday and we tried to get people to comment about this, we didn't find anybody who was willing to say that on camera, to say, no, we are against this. So it seems like it's still a closeted resistance in some ways to this. You deal with conflict resolution and analysis. It's been almost 10 years since September 11th of 2001. At what point will we be ready for this? Are we just not there yet? Will we ever be there where something like this will be not met with as much resistance?
I think we will, and I think when you look back over history, this is a moment when unfortunately the way this has played out has not been good for the country, I think. But this is a moment when we can be tolerant or not. When you look back on issues of tolerance and intolerance, we're usually embarrassed when we were not tolerant in the past, whether it's the Japanese internment camp, whether it's anti-Semitism in clubs, even around issues of civil rights. When we look back on these issues, the McCarthy period, we like to think of ourselves as having been tolerant. This is a moment when we...
This is nothing like that. This is nothing like any of those moments. This is people saying that this is sort of inappropriate given the proximity to ground zero. I mean, if this were a discussion about whether or not we can accept Islam, I mean, that would be one thing.
But what if it plays... My worry is that if it plays out in an us-them form, which it well could, and that's all I'm trying to say. If it plays out in that way, it has the potential to be a divisive Bill Ayers type issue. I'm worried about that, and I think that and we can hope that it doesn't play out in that way.
So we're talking about 2 blocks away from ground zero. Then, JP, if this was 20 blocks away from ground zero, would it make a difference?
Well, I mean, look, I haven't looked at a map as to what's 20 blocks from ground zero, but I'm actually more than willing to believe that 20 blocks from ground zero, there are probably some mosques. Right. I would say that we are not living exactly in a hotbed of anti-Muslim violence. In fact, I'd say that the extent to which we've made efforts as a country to bend over backwards to ensure that Muslims felt that they were welcome in this country, you know, that when we do our screening, we don't do racial profiling, we don't do religious profiling, we force, you know, white grannies, you know, to remove their shoes at airports. I mean, all of these things are us showing that we really are religiously tolerant, that we're not going after people because of religion. And I think that that's a very positive thing, and that shows that we are tolerant, that we do take that high road that the professor's talking about.
All right, we're going to have to wrap things up. Bottom line, though, from both of you, will this impact the election in November?
Yeah, probably.
To some extent, but not as much as people think.
All right, gentlemen, we really appreciate you. Solon Simmons, JP Freire, thanks for being with us this morning. Appreciate hearing from both of you.